Hello, hello, everyone. We're just going to give it 1 minute to let everyone in the waiting room here join us. If this is your first time tuning in, this is the Road to FX series, and I'm Serafina. It's really nice to virtually be with you all. While we wait for everyone to pile in, we would love to know where you're calling in from, what you're building. So go ahead and drop that. Hello, Peter from Tulsa. Go ahead and drop it in the chat. We want to know who you are, what you're building, where you're based. It will be a small crew, and this will be an interactive session today. And if you are joining us for the very first time, this is the Road to FX. This series is our lead-in to our biannual summit, Onward FX, where we host founders to funders and corporate strategics based on their very specific mandates. And historically, one out of every four companies that we invite to FX have walked away with a term sheet or a partnership. And in case you'd like to learn more about that event, applications for that next cycle, they officially opened on Monday and it'll run for the next 5 weeks. And this cycle, we're working with folks like Halliburton Labs, Chevron Technology Ventures, Exxon, Equinor, Energy Innovation Capital, Eclipse, and about 20 other institutional venture capital providers and corporate partners. And as far as stage coverage goes, these are folks that are writing checks from pre-seed all the way to Series D. And I know all of this may sound confusing or maybe even crazy, but this is a zero cost program. It's no fees, no brokers, nothing like that ever. We do this because we believe that commercial success for deep tech takes a pretty potent ecosystem of players to navigate things like the fundraising landscape, regulatory hurdles, and the technology itself. And we're so lucky to have an amazing community of collaborators to help make that journey a little less opaque for entrepreneurs. So, in that vein, today's guest might be running what might be the most hands-on corporate scaling program in energy. Susanna Sabbagh is the executive director of venture development at Halliburton Labs. And since their launch in 2020, the program has worked shoulder to shoulder with 40 companies across storage, hydrogen, carbon capture, critical minerals, and water. And they've embedded these companies inside one of the world's largest energy services companies. So today, Susanna will walk us through the Halliburton Labs partnership playbook, how they select the companies that they work with, what 12 months inside actually looks like, and what founders in energy hardware should understand before engaging a corporate partner. Today's session, if you're just joining us, is interactive. We will have time reserved at the end for Q&A, so drop your questions in the Q&A feature. And I'm already seeing a very active chat, so I look forward to learning about who we're all joined by today and what you're building. And again, if today's session feels relevant for what you're building, and if you'd like to meet with folks like Halliburton Labs, Chevron, Equinor, Exxon, and 20 plus more of our institutional VCs that are coming, please look out for more information in your inboxes after the event. We'll follow up with the recording and some more info on how to stay plugged in. So with that, I will pass it to Pyle um, to transition to our next part of the conversation.
Yes, so it's so nice to have everyone in the audience join us. Just as a reminder, we are going to have questions at the end. To make it a little easier, please use the question feature and not the chat feature, so we can, sideline those. But it is great to have you here, Susanna, on this Friday. Now, as Serafina said earlier, Halliburton Labs isn't a traditional CVC or an accelerator. When founders come to you, what are they looking for? And also, in the same turn, what types of questions are you looking to get answers to when you first meet founders in that first meeting?
Yeah, so lovely to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Seeing some wonderful information come through on the chat just before I even answer your question. I'm hoping that maybe you can share with me some of that chat information later because I see a lot of folks introducing their companies, and I'd love to be able to have a
Yes,
skim through afterwards.
we will find a way to make sure you get all of this information in the
Fantastic.
chat.
Yeah, so Halliburton Labs, as Serafina said, we were founded in 2020. We are part of Halliburton, a global energy services company. We have about 45,000 employees working about 80 different countries around the world. And we're more than 100 years old, but for the vast majority of that time, almost exclusively the work we've done in the energy spaces as a service company to oil and gas with some additional activities in things like geothermal, more recently in things like carbon sequestration, direct lithium extraction, but predominantly hydrocarbons. And so what Halliburton Labs is, and we don't think we're a typical CVC or we don't like to call it an accelerator. What we are is an insight engine for Halliburton to help the company understand the shifts and the expansion and the diversification of the energy landscape so that we can think about the next 100 years of being a service company to energy when energy means a lot more diverse value chains than maybe we've considered in the past. And so in order to build that insight and understanding and think about those future business opportunities for the company, what Halliburton Labs does is we work really closely with hard tech innovators in that sort of broad definition of energy. Serafina mentioned, water, critical minerals, energy storage, power generation, grid resilience, really quite an expansive definition of energy. And we explicitly don't invest in companies in oil and gas. So we absolutely could have commercial interest in some early stage innovators who are more in the core business, and we can always refer those folks into the core business. But we're really looking for people who are solving important problems that have a meaningful market potential in energy more broadly. We're looking for all the things a VC would in terms of the investability of the company, but specific to our model, the two things we really care about are, do we believe that working alongside you, we can gain insight into a market we're not familiar with today? So can we learn from working with you about the customers you serve, about the problems you're trying to solve? And then absolutely critically, do we think we can help you? And that's because really the foundation of our model is putting the global capabilities of a company like Halliburton to work for the startups. So we can talk more as we go on about what that looks like, but we're really thinking about for your technology or your innovation to have the impact that it has the potential to have. What are the scaling hurdles you're likely to come across? And are those the kinds of problems that we're good at solving organizationally? And if so, what are the ways that we might be able to put our resources, our expertise, our networks, our experience to work as an extension of your team to help you get over those hurdles faster and reach that scale?
Okay. I'm so curious. So you have to look at companies both from a capability standpoint, but also from a investment standpoint. How do
Yeah.
those two lenses interact? And then I also find it interesting that you're looking at things that the traditional parent company is not focused in industry wise, maybe
Yeah.
broader industry, but like the emerging energy landscape. So I'm curious, like, what are the interactions with the parent business and, what you're scouting for and, how do employees typically react?
Yeah, we find this is quite unusual for compared to a lot of corporates. A lot of corporate investment and innovation teams are explicitly trying to solve a problem for the business today. So the business unit is saying, we need to reduce energy usage in this process, or we need to find a way to make use of waste heat, or we need to reduce emissions, or whatever it is. And the corporate innovation or CVC is going out and trying to find a solution to that problem that's sourced from the business. What we're doing is trying to boil down the core competencies that have enabled us to be a leader in the field we're in today to things that are not necessarily inherently tied to hydrocarbons, the kinds of problems we're good at solving. And then look at these emerging value chains and say, where could there be similar looking problem sets that could be a really interesting place that we think we could uniquely create value in the future. But we're operating on a longer timeline
Okay.
than the business units of today who have to execute today's business and deliver a return for today's shareholders. So we have the privilege to be able to look over the next horizon, look on frankly on a hard tech startup kind of timeline where the innovation that is beginning to be cultivated today might not be at commercial scale for 5 years because hard tech is really hard to scale. But we can look at that kind of timeline. How does capability and sort of investability interact? Like I said, we typically we're going to want to see the same kinds of evidence of investability as a financial VC would,
Okay.
but then we're going to layer on top what are the practical steps that will be necessary to scale, and can we help with those things? What I think has been a really positive sign from the ecosystem over the last few years is, when we were founded in 2020, there was a lot of going out and trying to pitch ourselves to startups. Why might you want to spend any time talking to a company like Halliburton? How are we going to be able to work with you? And we're certainly always still very, very happy to do that. But what's increasingly been the case over the last few years is we're getting referrals in from financial investors. We will have VCs who we know who will come to us and say, look, I can write these guys a bigger check than you can, but I think you can specifically help them spend it on the right things at the right times in the right way as efficiently as possible to hit the milestones that we believe they are capable of hitting and that they need to hit to be able to raise their next round. And so it's this complementarity of the
Yeah, it's a
financial
very nice
capital
symbiotic
and
relationship.
yeah. Well, they need to, startups always need to raise capital, and we do put some cash in. Our model is a combination of cash and then this sort of in-kind hands-on help for equity. But I think we're starting to see a recognition with a lot of financial investors that there is something unique around hard tech scaling, that you can't always just throw money at the problem. There are some real tangible scaling challenges that an organization like ours has had to get good at solving. We've had to learn some lessons the hard way over our 107-year history. And frequently we can accelerate, as much as we don't like to be called an accelerator, we can help startups get there faster, because rather than a team having to, figure something out from the ground up when they're a small team and they're pulled in 100 different directions, if we have somebody who can spend an hour with them listening to what they're trying to achieve and then help step them through how we would approach that problem, we can very often speed that process up. So it's this combination of the problems they're trying to solve, the things we're good at solving. If so, then the kinds of collaboration we can make happen with them will be meaningful enough to their growth that that's a reasonable value exchange, that the founders, the existing cap table, can all feel like that's a good, equitable value exchange for both parties.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, what I find very interesting about the Halliburton Labs model, compared to other like CVCs or innovation programs, is you're really looking to get insights that for where the industry is going. And so, like, if you're able to share, what's an example insight that you've learned from working with your portfolio companies that maybe you understand about the industry, or maybe you have even brought back to your core business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really that at base, that's why we exist, is to help de-risk potential future business opportunities for the parent company. And I think particularly sort of since 2020, we've been in this sort of massive investment surge, for whether you want to call it clean tech or climate tech. we're now in another huge hype cycle around AI and hyperscalers. And I think the philosophy was, look, we've been successful as Halliburton because we've done things we really understand. And so when it comes to thinking about these new emerging opportunities and value chains, um, you know, we shouldn't be making big bets before we understand them. And so when we started, we took this very sort of broad approach to what might be an interesting sector, because the list of energy markets and value chains that we didn't know anything about was pretty much infinite.
Okay.
So we went quite broad. I think over the sort of 5 or so years, we have been able to clarify for ourselves internally, for our leadership, hey, there are some value chains where the sort of the density of interesting problems that look like things a company like Halliburton is good at is higher in some value chains than others. And so over time, we've maybe narrowed that focus a little bit in terms of the sectors that feel particularly relevant to
Mhm.
our skill set. But we always preserve a certain proportion of our attention, of our portfolio for the things that are a little bit further out there, because we don't want to lose the sense of Halliburton Labs as the mechanism by which we discover things we haven't thought to look at before. And so it would sort of defeat the object if we narrowed too much and said, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
well, after 5 years, we've decided A, B, and C are the only places that are interesting. Well, now we've lost the sort of the innovation and the ideation piece of it. So we try and keep an open mind to that. Um, I think some people may have seen we have an investment corporately in a company called VoltaGrid. We are developing some commercial and operational relationship with them around power generation internationally. That was very informed by a better understanding than we would have had 5 years ago around what is that sort of distributed power generation market looking like? What kinds of problems come not just from a technology standpoint, but how will that technology need to be deployed and maintained and operated? Those are all things we're good at. And so that's kind of what the flow looks like, is on an individual portfolio company level, we're very focused on understanding what milestones that company needs to hit and making sure we can help them get there faster. But if you pull up, it's for internally, it's more around what do we see are the market spaces that, whether or not they're getting all the headlines and the hype, look like they have the right sort of macro trends happening, and to reach their potential will need operationalizing in a way that looks like the kinds of things we're good at doing.
Yeah. And that segues like perfectly into my next question. And, you've had a storied career at Halliburton, and you came from a role in technology commercial, or you've had excuse me, technology commercialization role within parent Halliburton. From that experience and your insights, what's the main reason technologies fail to scale inside of large organizations, even if that technology works?
Yeah, so it was actually the job that first brought me to the US. So I've been with Halliburton nearly 30 years. I came from a startup. In fact, myself, right out of college, went to work for a software startup who were bought by Halliburton software business, and kind of the rest is history.
So,
But that was
so
in
you have a lot of empathy for everyone in the
it
audience.
feels very full circle to be working with startups again at this point in my career. But yeah, that was in the UK. I worked in Canada for a while as well. The role that brought me to the US was program management for new product commercialization for our largest business line. Um, and at that time, we were really trying to grapple with exactly your question. We had a very robust technology development process, a gated life cycle technology development process. Um, but we had these examples where, technology built the thing and it did whatever it was supposed to do. And somehow it never sort of crossed over to a commercial either product, or in our case, more typically a product that enables a service, but it wasn't really commercializing at scale. And so the organization was trying to figure out what, like, exactly your question. Where are we going wrong? What are we missing? And the conclusion was that we have this really robust process for technology development, but we get it all the way to sort of ready, and then we throw it over the wall to the organization, and we hope that they're going to pick it up and run with it, and they're going to know how to sell it, and they're going to know how to manufacture it, and they're going to know how to maintain it. And by the way, we're hoping it's still true that the customer wants it. And so the role that I had at that time was really trying to figure out how do we expand that sort of stage gate process to encompass all those other things so that from the beginning, from the ideation, we were closely joined to, do we understand why we're building this thing? Is this the thing we should be building? Is there a customer who really wants it? What is that customer's other option at the moment? What will they pay for it? Through to, will we be able to manufacture it efficiently and at scale in the way that it's been designed? What kind of maintenance will it require? How are we planning to execute that? Operationally, will it need new skill sets in our workforce when it gets out in the field to be able to operate it? And how are we preparing for that? Does our business development team understand how they're going to sell it? Are there any regulatory compliance concerns? All of these things that a company like Halliburton, we're used to solving, but we were maybe leaving it too late in the process to start trying to solve them. And so the idea was pull all of those questions much earlier in the technology development process and be checking in on them at the same time as we're checking in on the development process. And I think all of that is very analogous to what we see startups challenged with. We invest seed to Series A, roughly. And that's means that often the companies we're working with at the point where we get to know them, 90% of their focus has been on making the thing. Does the thing do the thing? It's does the product work? Could the product work? Absolutely essential, obviously, but you don't want to leave it too late to also check in on, are we designing it in a way that we can manufacture it at scale? Are we designing it in a way that we understand what the sourcing implications are going to be, and we know we're going to have vendors as we, move from building 1 to building 10 to building 1,000. Can we use this same design as we scale up? Will this same design work in all markets? Will it work in all climates? All of these things that you have to think about with hard tech. Will it work at an operational and commercial scale? What are the implications for the end customer in terms of how they're going to work with it? All of these things that sort of a large company has to be able to think of. For startups, we want them thinking of those things well before they reach that scale point so that they're sort of not building problems into their design that then they'll have to solve with urgency later.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And my next question is, you now have close to 40 portfolio companies within Halliburton Labs. What is not necessarily what criteria you're looking for, but what is the profile of the type of founder you work with? Because you're probably not looking for, a CV, like, do they have this experience? But like, talk to the profile.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have loose sort of criteria around, not earlier than TRL4, and we'd like the team to be probably at least sort of 5 to 7 at the low end. You need to be out of the lab. We don't really want to take science risk. We will absolutely take execution risk because that's where we think we can help the most. So, even our formal criteria have some wiggle room. We had a cohort last year coming out of one of our pitch events where one of the companies we brought in at that time is currently raising a Series B. One of the companies we brought in at that time is currently raising a seed. So we can definitely be a little bit flexible if those things around, can we help you? Are you solving a meaningful problem? Yada, yada. If those are all met. What makes a really great fit, all other things being equal? I think it's founding teams who know they don't know everything,
Okay. Yeah.
And have ask really good questions, have identified, typically a startup team, you can't have an expert in everything when you're a startup. You're not going to have a supply chain manager when you're a startup. You're not necessarily going to have somebody thinking about eventual operational processes because you're still working on, going from grams to kilograms, whatever it is. Um, but are they thinking about the things they will ultimately need to be able to solve for and asking good questions? Um, Coachable, not in the sense that we're ever going to try and tell somebody to run how to run their
Yeah.
business. That's their business. But in the sense of, are you open to feedback? Are you open to talking with people who've solved similar looking problems in the
Yeah.
past and sort of collaboratively trying to brainstorm, hey, what's similar here? What's different? How might past experience in one domain translate? And really, the companies that get the most out of this model are the companies who ask for everything. I
Okay.
think I think early on, some of our portfolio companies right at the beginning, well, we had hypotheses about what we thought we could be helpful on. We were like, we're very sure we can help you with manufacturing scale up. We're very confident we can help you with sort of thinking through your supply chain. Over time, thanks to the companies who were willing to ask us everything that was on their mind, we've uncovered these other ways we're helpful as well. So government relations and permitting. A lot of these technologies have
Okay.
sort of regulatory considerations, which even if they are not directly in the markets that we're in today, we can be really helpful in thinking about like how do these regulations get written by who at a state level, at a national level? How can you think about engaging stakeholders now who could be really impactful as this sector develops? So organizational design, thinking about how to navigate corporates in general, how do big companies
Okay. Yeah.
make decisions. There are a lot of those things that it's thanks to founders who were like, hey, I don't know if you can help me with this, but here's what I'm struggling with right now.
Mm.
And then we look across our networks and our organization. We go, well, actually, it turns out when you're a global services company, you have people who know how to do those things even if we're working in a completely different sector from you, the type of problem that needs to get solved is transferable. And here is somebody who can help you think through that specific issue.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You
a
never.
founder who shows up fully willing to ask everything helps us figure out additional ways to be helpful.
Yeah. With your trusted partners, you never know unless you ask.
Right.
So. So you've talked a lot about what Halliburton Labs provides, but is there anything Halliburton Labs doesn't do? And where does the corporate relationship end? And uh, is there anything else that the founders should know about what they're getting in working with Halliburton Labs?
Yeah, so I think probably the most important difference between us and a lot of corporate or strategic investors is back to what I said at the beginning, because we are not looking for solutions to a problem in today's business, and because we are looking outside of the market we're currently operating in, what that means is typically we're not going to be the pilot customer. You are not engaging with Halliburton so that you can sell your solution to Halliburton because we're working with you precisely because you do something outside of the business. So we're probably not going to be the pilot. That said, we absolutely can and have done make interesting introductions that can lead to great pilot opportunities. We have some portfolio companies who are getting pilot opportunities with companies either in our customer base today or in our supplier base or just elsewhere in the network. But we're not typically going to be your customer. What else we don't do? We will never give you legal advice. Go get your own
Okay, yeah.
lawyer.
And you should
We can
never
do
take
things
legal advice from anyone
really,
besides a
really
lawyer.
important. We can absolutely and frequently do look at draft commercial agreements that you're considering signing, either with a pilot customer or with a vendor for a vendor of your own. We can look at those with a commercial lens and say, hey, if we were presented with this as Halliburton, we would have questions about this clause.
Okay.
The reason they're asking for this is probably they're thinking about this scenario, and you want to think through that as well. So we can do that kind of thing, but we're never going to give you legal advice. And we don't want to be anywhere near your IP. So we operate to the greatest extent possible on a non-confidential basis. We
Okay.
have occasions where, um, on several fronts, we've been the manufacturer for the first sort of whatever 10 pilot units for one of our portfolio companies. If we're going to do something like that, or help think through design for manufacturability, things like that, that might be more effective if we had visibility of the core technology. We'll put an NDA around that. Here are the named
Okay.
individuals who are going to look at that specific piece of IP for this reason, um, but only if it's really necessary, and otherwise we stay out of the IP. So we're not going to help you develop the actual fundamental technology, nor do we even want to see it. And we're not going to give you legal advice, and we're probably not your pilot. Um, we don't typically follow on, but we may. We have done if we have particularly high conviction around not just the team and the solution, but the alignment piece. But we don't try and set that expectation.
And just so everyone in the audience knows, I have one or two more questions, and then I'm going to switch to audience Q&A. I see a few already in there, but just make sure to drop in your questions into the Q&A section. So, my second to last question for you, Susanna, uh, the world has gotten a lot more complicated in 2006. Companies in the energy industry have their priorities shifting. Capital markets are, in flux. Some areas of the clean energy transition have had a pullback. How has that affected what you do at Halliburton Labs and maybe how your portfolio companies operate?
Um, yes, it's a roller coaster ride. I think it hasn't had a huge it hasn't caused a huge shift for us because I think from the conception, we've always looked for, does your business make sense on the fundamentals? So while there were incentives and, tax breaks and subsidies, those were all always nice sort of sprinkles on the top, but
Mhm.
we always wanted to see somebody solving a real problem that people would pay for, just
Yeah.
sort of fundamentally for the value generated. Um, I think for our portfolio companies, and for everybody in the sort of climate tech space, there's a certain amount. There are some sectors that are really challenged by that because the fundamental value prop was really all climate driven. There are a lot of companies who were an energy efficiency or just efficiency broadly play, or a risk reduction, or the value came from something above and beyond
Mhm.
environmental impact. And so for them, it's a language tweak. It's how are we talking about what the value to the end customer really is. And yeah, so some of the sort of green and climate may have dropped from the language, but if the solution was always creating value for an end customer, that's still the case. I think one of the interesting things that's happened this year is a heightened focus on supply chain vulnerabilities.
Oh, yeah.
We started thinking about that in a whole new way in 2020 and COVID, and then we all got a reminder this year of being really thoughtful about how your supply chain is composed, and how you manage risk in that. And so that's one of those areas that we work with a lot of our portfolio companies on. We have a very good global supply chain and procurement and logistics organization, and so helping companies think about, hey, the supplier I use for this critical component is the person who would pick up the phone to me when I had a team of 5 people and no website. But if I want to grow and scale, how do I diversify that supplier base? How do I think about putting my supply chain closer to my customer or closer to my manufacturing? Do I want to do my own manufacturing or outsource it? If I outsource it, how am I selecting that partner? So I think the last whatever it is, 3 or 4 months here have refocused some people's minds on thinking about that sort of that supply chain angle as well. But fundamentally, all the companies we invest in, it's because they can articulate who the customer is, who cares enough about the problem that they will pay to solve it, and why they have the best mousetrap to solve it. And that's always been the case. And if you tweak the language you use to describe it, so be it. But certainly we have not a shortage of water treatment, critical minerals, power gen type companies in the portfolio who the opportunity has never been bigger. So
Yeah.
there are sectors who are, having a tougher time at the moment, but energy broadly has never been a more exciting place to be, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. So I'm going to do a tradition that I like to do whenever I get a chance to have a conversation with an executive. So I call it that lightning round, and this is kind of to get to know you as a person as well. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and short responses, whatever comes to mind. Um, what's the most interesting place you've been pitched?
Um, So, like all of us in this space, I spend a lot of time at, conferences and convenings and summits of one sort or another. But during San Francisco Climate Week earlier this year, I was delighted to see on the schedule that somebody had organized a a dawn bird watching session in Golden Gate Park. And I thought, lovely, I'm going to take the camera, take my binoculars, I'm just going to go quietly stroll around Golden Gate Park and take pictures of birds, which I did, and it was lovely. But I definitely also got pitched while I was there because enough people had figured out, oh, it's Climate Week, and let me figure out who here might write me a check. But and I did not see that one because they were a software company and we only invest in hard tech. But yeah, I
Okay.
think that was a first for me, pitched while bird watching.
Is there a newsletter, book, or podcast that you recommend people?
So it's not very niche, and I'm sure many of you already listened to it, but I really like How I Built This
Okay.
as a podcast because it's entrepreneurs talking about not just telling their success story, but talking about what went wrong and the missteps and the whoops, we better pivot and the oh God, it nearly all fell apart, but then we figured out how to fix it. And I think I would imagine helpful for founders who are in the middle of it
Yeah.
to hear from entrepreneurs who are seen as very successful today, but hear about how they likewise had to fight through that journey. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good one.
And then how do you use AI in your day-to-day life?
I definitely still treat it as the eager, hardworking intern.
Okay, yeah.
Like I don't necessarily believe a tremendous amount of what it comes back with, but I appreciate it cutting cycles and like getting there really quickly.
Yeah.
And then I know I'm gonna have to do some checking and like confirm your sources and hang
Yeah.
on a minute, didn't the thing you just say contradict the thing you said just before that? So I think I still I retain a fairly high degree of skepticism about the outputs, but I certainly benefit from it in terms of just the sort of the volume. Go pull me and synthesize information from multiple sources on this topic and help me sort of high grade or prioritize what I'm then going to personally spend my time trying to get to understand better.
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that term, highly
eager
eager
intern.
intern.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna switch to audience Q&A now. Just so you know, everyone, we'll get through most of these questions, and I may have to paraphrase them some. So first one, uh, okay, you already answered what your preferred TRL is, but do you prefer startups have already had a completed a pilot dis demonstration before they work with Halliburton Labs?
I not necessarily. I think what I would say is we would love you to at least have line of sight do a pilot, like have a pretty good sense of, hey, in my pipeline, I have two or three potential customers, and I understand what we will need to be able to show for them to think we're ready for a pilot. But you don't need to have already executed a commercial pilot. No, you do need to be out of the lab, not necessarily at pilot scale, but like the science works, the thing does the thing. Now we've got to go find out if the thing will do the thing in an operational environment.
Yes. So you kind of touched on this, but if you're able to share any more details, um, does Halliburton Labs invest directly in portfolio companies? If so, at what stages typically and typical set check size, if you're able to share? And what are this is a long question, but I'm trying to just filter the most important parts. And what are like maybe the technical and commercial milestones that you're, you know, um, high grading for?
Yeah. So technical and commercial, we kind of just touched on tier L4 sort of bare minimum. Maybe more mature than that, ideally getting close to a pilot, may already have had one. Um, do we invest directly? Yes, we do. Can I share the check size? Yes, and I think it's actually really important that people understand our model because it is not, like I've said multiple times, we're not a straight CVC. So what we are not doing is writing you a check for your, calculated the same as your other investors for equity and then sort of waving our hands and saying we'll try and be helpful too. What we're doing is an exchange of equity for that really meaningful help plus a bit of cash. So a typical deal, we're typically coming in, like I said, seed to Series A. And a typical, and again, there's wiggle room, and it depends a little bit the stage the company's at and what they've raised to date and so forth. But a sort of median deal might be 100,000 in cash and 400,000 value for the in-kind help for low single digits, 5%, something like that. We're never leading, obviously. At 5%, we're not taking board seats. So we try and differentiate. We're super hands-on with the what do you need? What expertise can we make available to you? How can we help you solve a problem? But we're super hands-off in terms of who else do you want to raise from? Who are you going to sell to? We're not going to take a board seat. So we're very light touch on the sort of the governance. There's no exclusivity, there's no ROFRs, and then we're very high touch on the how we're going to work together day to day.
And this is an interesting question. Has Halliburton acquired any of your portfolio companies, or is that of interest to y'all?
So sort of going back to the where's our remit versus the core company. As Halliburton, we have a long history of M&A. We have entire some of our largest business lines still carry the name of the company that was acquired that formed the basis of that business line. So as a corporate, we absolutely do acquisitions. Because Halliburton Labs is explicitly tasked with go find people solving problems outside of the business. Certainly to date, we have not made any acquisitions because none of the portfolio companies would have a place to sit in the parent company because as of today, we're not operating in those spaces. Never say never. It's conceivable that over time, if we build conviction around, hey, we really want to, as a corporate, we want to go participate in this value chain. And maybe there are companies we see that we're like, hey, actually, we could really amplify the impact that they can have from within the business. It's possible. It's not the strategic intent of the group at present, and it's not something we've done to date.
Okay. And so Daniel asked a question, but we covered the part that was seed and Series A is your sweet spot. Um, is Richard asks, is the program open to non-US startups or startups
Absolutely.
open to expanding, relocating?
So no requirement that anybody relocate anywhere. We when we started, which was like a month into COVID. So we had put all these plans together that we were like, hey, people will want to come and be based in Houston. We have wet labs and we have makerspace and they can come and be on location. And then, like I say, we launched May of 2020. So we were like, never mind. Let's figure out how to be useful virtually. And that was a blessing in disguise because it prompted us to go, hang on a minute, we're a global organization. That's kind of the point. And we can be helpful everywhere. And so our portfolio today is global. I would say we're probably two-thirds to three-quarters North America, US and Canada. And the balance, we have a company in India, we have two in Singapore, we have one in New Zealand, we have one in Finland, so we're kind of
Yeah.
reaching out around the world. And what we find is there are a lot of internationally based companies who are interested in accessing the US market, and we can
Yep.
certainly be very helpful there. We also have a lot of North American companies who are getting pilot opportunities internationally and don't know how to go operate on the other side of the world. And that's another place we can be super helpful is, okay, well, here's our country team in Brazil where you have a pilot opportunity and they can help you figure out how are you going to import your equipment in a way that you can export it again when you're done. And how are you going to support it remotely from your headquarters in wherever? And are there local content requirements and what's the tax regime and all of those kinds of things. So we've seen we can be helpful to companies all around the world, and we love to hear from international applicants as well.
Okay, wonderful. And then this question is more of like your perspective of maybe geopolitics and strategies. What are key problems, pain points in the energy sector that you expect startups will be the ones that solve?
Oh, I mean, I think a ton of what we're trying to grapple with now around sort of grid resilience, grid renewal, distributed power, uh, cooling. There's a lot that is sort of in that climate mitigation space or climate adaptation space rather, that I think it's going to be startups that are creating the innovations that will let us figure out how to adapt to the world we see today. Certainly on the power front. I mean, to whatever degree you believe or do not believe that the AI thing is a hype bubble, what is indisputable is the absolutely extraordinary growth in power demand, and there is no way. I think what the last 5 years working in this role has made really clear to me is innovation is going to repeatedly come from outside of established industry, but to reach its potential, to have the impact that it wants to have, this partnership with established industry to figure out that, okay, how do we do this more than one at a time? How do we do this all around the world repeatably, reliably? This isn't just a Halliburton thing. Large industries in general have had to figure out safety and process and reliability, and global deployment and logistics and all of these things. And so it's this, I think it continues to be the fun part of this job is figuring out that synthesis between extraordinary innovation coming from entrepreneurs and then, okay, how do we take that to its full potential, leveraging the lessons that established industry has had to learn the hard way over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's I've been in this space for probably like the past 10 years, and where the magic happens is when the elephant learns to work with the ant and
Yeah,
the the symbiosis
yeah, yeah.
symbiosis.
And
Uh
figure out how not, I mean, I think that's a great analogy because part of what industry has to do is figure out how not to crush it.
yes, yes.
Yes.
So Miriam asked, do you assist in manufacturing of parts for companies you work with?
Yes. So on two fronts, on several fronts. So we have examples where we have helped portfolio companies spec and deploy their own manufacturing plants. We have a battery company in the UK, actually sodium battery company called LiNa out of the UK, who were getting ready to stand up their first manufacturing plant, and some of our manufacturing folks went and spent a couple of days with them and took out about 50% of their planned cost just by going, okay, you're overspecking here. You don't need to automate that thing. We can find you a better supplier for this piece of equipment. So we can be helpful in helping them figure out how to manufacture for themselves if that's the right thing for the startup. We also work with portfolio companies on, okay, you've decided you do want to outsource. Who should you be outsourcing to? What should you be looking for? How should you qualify those companies? And also, what is a contract manufacturer going to need to see from you? So what state do your drawings need to be in? What kind of specs are they going to need to hear? How do you want to put that contract together in terms of quality management? All of those kinds of things, if what they want to do is outsource. But then to the specific question, we also have several companies where what we did for them was do the manufacturing or at least the assembly of their units for them in one of our manufacturing facilities for that first, X number of units so that they could go execute pilots with them
Okay.
and sort of build that credibility in those reference cases.
Um, and I guess it seems like the audience is wanting to connect with Halliburton Labs. Like, what is the best way? Is a warm intro required? Cold emailing you? Is there an application? Like, how do founders
Yes.
get in touch with
So,
you?
so the really unfortunate thing about the timing of this webinar is our current we go on a cohort base. We do 2 pitch days a year as part of our selection process. Our next pitch day will be in September in Houston, and the deadline for applications for that cohort closed on the 6th of July, unfortunately. Just because we have to give ourselves enough breathing room without more applications coming in to try and figure out, the high grading and the down selecting and the diligence to pick those finalists who will participate in September. That will open again. It's on the website, halliburtonlabs.com. There is an apply button. Like I say, it's currently closed. But it's really just an application. Tell us about what problem are you solving, what's unique about your solution, tell us a bit about the team, who are your customers, value prop, all the normal kind of stuff, just to help us get that sort of demographic sense of who you are and what you're doing. And then from that, we'll have conversations with companies and get to know the founders a little bit and really explore if there's that mutual fit.
Okay.
Um, because obviously the founder needs to feel like we could create enough value for them that it would be worth them giving us some equity. So that's an ongoing process. Um, do we need a warm intro? We love a warm intro. We particularly love if you've heard about, if you have a current investor who we can chat with, that's great, but it's not necessary. We do get plenty of just straight inbound, hey, here's what I'm doing, here's why I'd be interested in exploring whether there's a fit. And that is typically the application process. But if folks want to send me an email, I can route those to our scouting folks, and we'll make sure at least you're in the watch window for when the application opens again.
Yeah, yeah. And that's I'll put in a shout out to the Onward FX application as well. It sounds like Halliburton Labs, the cycle, but I always tell founders it's better to build the relationship
100%. Yeah,
earlier than you expect to engage in that relationship. So,
yeah.
founders in the audience, be on the lookout for the formal Halliburton Labs application and then also apply via Onward FX on by
If I
August.
Yes, and if I could just say, if anybody is in the Houston area or is interested, so Houston does a Houston Energy and Climate Startup Week in September. Our pitch
That's a
day is
mouthful.
it's a terrible name with an unpronounceable acronym, but what are you going to do? But our pitch day on September 18th is like the final anchor event of that week.
Okay.
It's a great week if you're in energy tech. I'd encourage you to look at putting Houston on your calendar for that week. From our standpoint, our pitch events are open to the public. You'd be very welcome to come and see peers pitch, but learn a bit more about the program. We usually have several hundred investors in the audience and academics, so it's a great networking opportunity in that ecosystem. But that whole week long, there'll be very cool events that are good connection opportunities for innovators and startups.
Yeah, I'm actually based in Houston, so I highly recommend go check out the I I can't pronounce the full name,
Houston
but
Energy and Climate Startup Week.
yeah, but go to the website and look at all the events.
Yeah.
It's a great whole week of programming. Next question. Let me see if I can knock out a few of these before our time is up. Okay, this is an interesting question. Halliburton Labs or Halliburton um, has a new division called NaviScale. Um, what are maybe similarities or benefits of them versus Halliburton Labs, and do y'all work together? Like, how does the founder choose who to go with?
Yeah, so let me clear that one up a little bit. So not a division. So our model, we didn't really talk too much about this, but the Halliburton Labs model, there are 7 of us on the Halliburton Labs team
Okay.
with what we like to say is 45,000 volunteers, which is the entire rest of the organization that we can call on to work with our portfolio companies. What NaviScale was doing, and we're not really extending this any further, um, was experimentally what if we provide some of the same kind of help, particularly around manufacturing and sourcing, to
Uh,
startups that we aren't taking equity in? So that was on a commercial sort of fee for service basis,
okay.
where Halliburton Labs is an equity transaction, and then you get unlimited kind of unmetered help as a portfolio company versus NaviScale was like, here is your hourly rate for us to solve these kinds of problems with you. It was more of a sort of a venture, if you will, that we were sort of testing out that helped us validate what are the skill sets that we have that are most valuable to startups and most needed. So it's actually not really an active, ongoing piece of the business.
Okay.
So if the kind of help that I've been talking about feels like kind of help that would be really relevant for your startup, I strongly encourage you to apply to Halliburton Labs specifically.
Okay, wonderful. And we just have a few minutes left, and I apologize to everyone where we couldn't get to your questions, but come to Houston Climate Week, reach out through your network and get in touch with Halliburton Labs, and I'm sure they'll I'm sure they'll be willing to answer your questions. But my question to you, just to wrap it up, Susanna, is many of the founders in this audience have gone from 0 to 1, and now they're wanting to get from 1 to 100. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I mean it's the simplest thing in the world that everybody always tells startups is build something that people want. And so fundamentally, I would say the only way you know you're doing that is talk to your customers. Talk to your customers for basic customer discovery right at the beginning. Talk to your customers again. And by your customers, I mean anybody you think ought to want what you have. Um, so customer discovery, is this a real problem? How are you solving it today? What are your alternatives? You've got to figure out, is this, you know, essential? Is it a painkiller or is it a vitamin? Is this a thing that you cannot do without, or is it a thing that I'm going to have to try and persuade you to spend money on? And then as you are scaling up, you move on to what would the specifications of the product need to be? What exactly is it going to need to deliver? And then as from that 1 to 10, 10 to 100, do you understand the operational environment that it would be deployed into? Do you understand what impact even a pilot would have on that customer's operational environment? How many stakeholders are there? How does that organization make decisions? Those are things you only ever answer by talking to customers. So that's what I would boil it down to, talk to your customers.
Well, wonderful. Well, on that, Susanna, I will wrap it up and thank you so much for your time. Audience, thank you so much for sticking with us for the full hour and being so engaged. I'm going to pull up the QR code because someone asked for it on how to apply to Onward FX. And with that, I'll leave it up for like a second or two, or a few seconds. But on that, I'll wrap it up. Hope everyone has a good rest of your day and have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was fun.